Welcome to the Brewers Institute podcast. I'm your host, Michael Capaldo. I'll speak with experienced brewery owners who have launched and grown their own brewing business. I'll share their wins, mistakes, and share advice on what they do differently next time. I'd like to welcome Oisín Sweeney, founder, head brewer, and director at Jervis Bay Brewing Company. Oisín, thanks for making the time to be with us today, mate.
You're welcome, Michael. Thanks for the invite. It's a great initiative. I wish it was up and running when I was opening a brewery.
The Brewers Institute?
Yeah, it's a good thing to have for budding brewers and people that are thinking about starting a new business. So good on you for doing it.
Yeah, well, we're doing that. I guess that we're not dissimilar to any other craft brewery out there, that we're starting with ambitions and goals and putting a lot of energy, and we're slowly building. But the people who are going through the course are getting good benefit, and we're actually really enjoying mentoring them. So it's pretty cool. Thanks for that, mate. Free plug. I have a free plug, mate. For those of us, for the listeners out there who don't know who you are, would you like to explain a little bit before we get into Jervis Bay Brewing? Like, who are you? Where do you come from? And how do we know each other even?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from Ireland originally. I ended up in Australia a little bit by accident. I met my wife in Ireland, and she's from the Riverina of New South Wales. Funnily enough, there's a connection there with Voyager, but we can go back to that if you want. Same shire as Voyager. But yeah, so I met Nicole in Cork when I was doing a PhD, and I didn't, to be honest, have any intention of moving to Australia until we found out we were expecting our first child. So, as I think with many soon-to-be new mothers, Nicole was quite keen to be closer to her mum, so out we came. So I come from the northwest of Ireland, a small county called Fermanagh, which I know that you and I have that odd coincidence, whereby you're one of the very few people outside Fermanagh and outside Ireland, I guess, that has maybe ever heard of Fermanagh.
Absolutely. I think I got married in one of your best mates' hotels, which is ridiculous, in County Fermanagh.
That's exactly right. So the Manor House Hotel, I was in class with a guy called Christopher Noble, whose family definitely at that time owned the Manor House. As to whether they do now, I'm not quite sure. I haven't been back in a while. But yeah, incredibly small world when you put it like that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you do your PhD in?
Ecology.
Ecology, right, okay.
Yeah, so I'm an ecologist by training. And moving to Australia was actually really good fun from an ecological point of view. Difficult because it's obviously a completely new environment and things like that. But I got a really good job down in South Australia when I first arrived in Australia. So Nicole and I and our then very new baby Finbar moved down to Mount Gambier for 3.5 years, where I worked for the South Australian government, Department of Environment. And then we decided it was just that little bit too far away. So we upped sticks and moved back to New South Wales. And after a few years working in an environmental NGO, that's when I took the leap and ended up, taking the plunge and gambling the rest of my life away to open a craft brewery.
Crazy stuff. Now, before we get into this, actually, I reckon it's time to crack a beer. I've got two beers here. I don't know if you can see them with the blurred background. I've got your Point Pert Pilsner, and I've got your Bright Idea XPA. Which one should I start with?
Probably the Pils. In a normal run of things, you'd go the sort of lagery style first, wouldn't you? So
yeah, absolutely.
A little bit more refreshing, little bit less alcohol for you for 12 o'clock start.
All right, mate. Let's do that. While I'm doing this, let's talk about gambling. Deciding to gamble your life away, going from a full-time, probably decently well-paid job that was maintaining your family to moving to Jervis Bay to have this crazy idea to start a brewery. Where did that concept come from?
It's cheers. Enjoy. So as you say, I had a really good job in South Australia, government job. We actually did a role swap when we moved back to New South Wales. I was the stay-at-home dad. So I I then got into the environmental NGO space, which definitely isn't as well paid a job as the government, but still very rewarding. Um, but when we moved back to New South Wales, to Jervis Bay, I got involved in a small homebrew group, and um, I was probably there were three regulars for a fourth occasional, and I was probably there was one guy that was really good at brewing, then there was me, and the other guys were a little bit just doing whatever for fun.
Had you
So we'd
homebrewed
always
before that group?
yes, I homebrewed since I arrived in Australia
So
because
yeah, so you weren't homebrewing back in Ireland?
no, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
So in Ireland, homebrewing really isn't a big thing. At least it certainly wasn't when I was living there. It's now 14 years since I've lived in Ireland, so
Yeah.
maybe times have changed as cost of living has hit, etc., etc. But it's because the pub culture is such a big thing in Ireland. Drinking at home is much less of a thing than it is in Australia. In Australia, backyard barbecues and the weather being good, you can meet friends in a park at a barbie, things like that. So drinking at home and not in the pub is much more common here. So nobody homebrews in Ireland, basically. I hadn't done it before. And it was only really when I chatted to the guy that I ended up doing my RSA with shortly after arriving in Australia. He told me he hadn't paid for a beer in years. I I was like, what do you mean? Yeah. Then I was like,
There's your light bulb moment.
it's like I just make my own. I was like, all right. So I thought, why don't I give that a go? I had no job, um, because I just arrived. So I thought, well, that's an excellent hobby to get into straight off the boat.
Hmm.
So I went straight down to the little brew shop and bought all the sort of really basic homebrew things and started from there.
So
So I'm probably
was this in Jervis Bay, sorry?
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
bought all my first stuff out of Nara, little shop in Nara, and then yeah, started brewing here. Um, Continued brewing when we moved down to Mount Gambier. I found it to be a really fantastic pastime and just really good fun. So um, yeah, and ironically enough, since opening a brewery, I haven't done a batch of homebrew whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
But you've done plenty of batches of beer as well in the brewery.
I
So
have. I've done a fair few batches of beer
that
now.
makes up for it. I'm interested about your background as an ecologist. Did that science-based background, even though it's not directly a food science, has that aided you at all in understanding the deep scientific mechanisms required to run a successful brewery?
I think probably yes. I think doing a PhD gives you attention to detail and an ability to research.
Yeah.
And both of those two things are important in brewing. When you're trying to develop new styles, when just in the process of brewing beer, you can be, as you probably know, you can be very fastidious or you can be quite laissez-faire,
Mm,
depending on on the brewer.
absolutely.
So I think having that fastidious sort of science-based nature is a good thing. Same with processes in cleaning, all of those various bits and pieces that individually in a brewery don't look that important, but they add up to be part of the bigger picture in my view. So if you pay attention to the detail, the outcome should be a lot better. That's how I view making beer. Um, so I do think that knowledge and that scientific background helped in that.
Yeah. That's interesting. And what was your PhD on out of curiosity?
It was the difference in bird communities in native and plantation forests. So
Wow.
that might sound, from an Australian perspective, very much of a no-brainer that the bird communities will be extremely different. But in Ireland, you have a much more generalist bird fauna. So that means that the plantation forests, which are predominantly non-native conifer species, can actually, with some management, be made to host a reasonable proportion of the native bird fauna.
Yeah.
It would be a much more difficult thing in Australia to do that because of just the massive diversity of birds that you get over here. So I was funded actually by the Irish Forestry Agency because it was part of their strategy to try to improve the plantations for various aspects of Irish biodiversity.
So rightio. So you've come over here. You're an ecologist. You've got that background. Tell us, I guess, tell us a bit. Actually, before we get into that, sorry, let me step backwards. I'm drinking your beer, your Point Perk Pilsner. Can you tell us a bit about this beer, please?
Yeah, sure. So that's it's I mean, we called it a Pilsner. In hindsight, for marketing purposes, we should have, I guess, called it a lager because Pilsner is very well known beer in the Australian European context, but
Mm.
perhaps a little less so in Australia. But essentially, it's a reasonably straightforward beer, lightly dry hopped lager style beer, nice and crisp. Low dry hop, just 2 grams a liter of Motueka. So I would call it a New World Pils
Yeah, it's
using
gorgeous. It's got that New World Pils flavor to it. As I was tasting it, like I was looking for those undertones of what you get in your traditional noble or Czech, and I was like, right, we're not quite there. But
no.
Motueka used to be known as B-SARS, right?
Exactly. Yes. So that's a lovely link between the old world and the new world, which is why I chose Motueka for that particular beer. Still cool fermented. We use S23 for that beer, and fermented 13 degrees. So nice and crisp. I think S23 complements the Motueka really nicely. A little bit of gives a little bit of fruity ester. And that beer, before we launched a new sort of Australian style lager, that beer would have been pretty much our top selling beer in the tap room always because we get quite a lot of visitors from west of the Divide in the summer. And one of the first questions the bar staff will always be asked was, what have you got that tastes like Carlton or VB? To which the answer is nothing,
Yeah, yeah,
but
totally.
you'll enjoy this Pilsner.
Yeah,
So
this is nothing like them. They're great beers in their own right. They've got a massive place in the Australian drinking demographic. But this Pilsner is really nothing like that, especially that dry hop character. But it's still
mm,
super refreshing. Like you said, it's got that fruity ester character to it. It's not a traditional Pilsner. When you enter it into, do you enter this beer into awards?
we do. It's
But it's like a
very
new world sort of category, right?
exactly. It's always a really difficult one to categorize, and I think it suffers in awards because of that. We have put it into the AIBAs again this year. I can't remember what category we put it in at. We did the entry about a month ago. Um, but it'll be some form of international style lager. It's a very, yeah. You read the guidelines of the category, and it's may or may not have
Yeah, yeah.
hop aromas, may or may not have X, Y, and Z. So it's a kind of a catch-all category, which I think makes it probably a little bit harder to do well in because you know, you're not actually brewing to a style that the judges might really recognize. So we'll see how it does. But I I mean, awards are one thing, but the proof of the pudding for us is obviously, and for any brewery, I guess, is in the customers and how they like it. And that's always been a super popular beer for us. So yeah, it's done well for us. And it's one that I would go back to fairly regularly myself after brewing and things, because it is just so refreshing and easy drinking and yet interesting.
Cool. So let's go back to the business in that case. So you're in a homebrew group. There's four of you. You're home brewing. You obviously took a pretty big leap. How did you actually start? Did you have partners? How did you fund the business? What was your business? What was your organizational setup at the start?
Yeah, so the homebrew group, none of them are now my partners. None of them were willing to take a leap. We talked about it, and to the extent that I actually grabbed the name Jervis Bay Brewing Company many, many years before we opened the business. But one of the guys is a researcher with ANU, one's a deputy headmaster aspiring to be a headmaster. So they've got really good, decent jobs, and they're not about to gamble them away with me to open a brewery. So it was really only when I met my current business partners, uh, two of whom didn't have a job, and one of whom owned another hospitality business, that it actually became a tractable proposition. So be very difficult to open a brewery by yourself just due to the cost and the amount of work that you need to do, and especially if you've got a job yourself at that period of time, just juggling those things. There's such a lot that you have to do to get the doors open. So when I met Paul, Christian, and Ben,
Mm.
it became a genuine thing that we could consider. Um, because I'd actually done home brewing, I by default became the brewer. So yeah, and the other
What year
guys,
are we talking about? Sorry, Oisín.
2018.
Yeah. So that's the year that you opened the doors.
No, we opened in 2019.
Okay, open.
So
So from basically from meeting to opening within that 12 or so month period.
yeah, about 18, because what we actually did, we contract brewed a batch of beer with Southern Highlands, with Camo and Toombs up in Southern Highlands,
Yep.
just to make sure that we had a viable, a viable idea and a market. So we just did a pure keg run with those guys.
So
We did that
based off your homebrew recipes?
based off a homebrew recipe. Yeah,
Cool.
we
Awesome.
did a Vienna lager was the first thing that we did. So we tossed up, do we do a pale ale? What do we do? And there's so many pale ales out there even back then that we thought maybe we should do something slightly different. Um, so we chose the Vienna lager, which we call the Beacon for better or for worse. Um, and yeah, we did a 20 hect batch of that. So we ended up with close to 80 kegs, which were all stuck in an insulated container out on Ben's property. Um, and I still remember at that time when we were driving back from Camo's place through Kangaroo Valley, up and down the mountains with, kegs in the back seat, a trailer load of kegs, the car sort of the brakes smoking as you're going down the hill, and the trailer full of kegs pushing you on down the hill. So it was pretty hairy stuff. We didn't have a clue what we were up to, obviously.
Yeah.
And then we'd 80 kegs that we then had to get rid of, which we had in an insulated container. And we gradually managed to get them into local businesses. So we got taps here and there, and they actually went pretty well. So we decided off the back of that we probably could make it work. And then it was about, well, what's the next step? Where do we put the brewery? How do we fund it? Et cetera, et cetera. And we ended up finding our current taproom location, which is very lucky in the Huskisson Industrial Estate, or it's known locally as the Woolamaya Industrial Estate, but the address is Husky. Um, so we found the perfect place in there, and we funded it just through equal shares from the four partners. We all chucked in 30 grand.
So private equity. So 30 grand each. So 120K you started a brewery.
Well, we thought we'd start a brewery on 120K. And then when we were putting the tap room together, we ran out of cash. So what we ended up doing is finding a consortium of local people who funded us to the tune of 100 grand in return for 20% of the business.
Right.
Now, those gentlemen, there's 20 of them, call themselves the Brew Puppies. And in hindsight, it is one of the greatest things that we did, even though it was a complete accident, because the range of skills that they have, they're not all, but largely retired local guys live in the area, not only guys, but mostly. And they have a massive range of skills. So we've been able to draw on their skills for various elements of the business, as well as obviously when you have 20 local people, local families, let's say, that have skin in the game, you then obviously have the start of a core of customers, which is also a really important thing when you're opening a brewery. So though the Brew Puppies, we are greatly indebted to, I would say. They got us over the line with the 100 grand and enabled us to open the doors. But like I say, that 100 grand is probably not their greatest contribution over the last 5 years. That it's been their skill set and guidance in various elements, including things like accountancy. Um, one of the Brew Puppies, who's unfortunately died a few years ago, was a very good accountant who'd worked for some clubs in New South Wales. So he was able to work with our accountant and really drill into what we need to be looking at as a business to function well financially. So they're the sort of things that those guys enabled us to do.
Well, and did you have those sort of skill sets in the initial core of four partners?
No, we didn't have accountancy skills. Now we did end up getting a good mate of ours, who's now a good mate, I guess, is an accountant. So we were very fortunate in that Josh was able to help us quite a lot. He was also able to help us put together our cash flow model. So
Yeah.
all of those things that you don't really think about when you're just saying, let's just start a brewery. It's all this background stuff that you probably hasn't crossed many people's minds. Like, well, how do you actually forecast what you're going to make, whether you can make it work? How do you know that when you open a business, you're making enough money to pay the bills further down the track? All of those sorts of things. So we were really lucky that Josh was able to help us put together our cash flow model. My partner, Paul, is our finance manager now and took it over at a reasonably early stage. And he does a great job, but he doesn't have a financial background. So having that external help was really important to us.
Mm.
And we still have some great people that we can call on. Josh is still around. We call on another local friend who's run a very successful business to mentor us, and things like that. So we were very cognizant of what we didn't know, which I think is good.
Yeah.
We were all what age was I when we opened the business? I would have been just coming up to 40, late 30s. So we were all reasonably mature guys. And I think with a bit of maturity, you start to definitely know what you don't know a little more and accept that you don't know everything and you don't have all the answers to everything. So we were very open in seeking that help to plug the gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting that that business model of the passionate entrepreneur, be it beer, be it cheese, be it, small goods, whatever it is, but people who go in and have a genuine passion, but then find themselves, they've put $30,000 of their own money in, and it's like, wait a minute, the priority of this business is actually, if we're going to continue to make our craft artisanal product, we actually need to be, have our financial statements
Mhm.
in place. We need to have a certain structure, governance structure around our accounting and our business systems and alike. So it's interesting that that you went through that initial wave of passion, but then very quickly you were cognizant of, wait a minute, we've got weaknesses, we've got shortfalls, and you seem like you were pretty lucky with the Brew Puppies to
Very.
get an amazing skill set from outside the business, that we're happy to contribute and also create a local culture, because that Huskisson community is obviously quite tight, being a small, pretty isolated population.
Yeah, exactly. And even more so back then. So when I moved to the area 14 years ago, um, it it's even changed a lot in that short time. So it's a much busier place now. It's particularly obviously in the summer season. But yes, it was very quiet and very insular back then. So yeah, we lucked out for sure getting those people's expertise. But yeah, what you say is exactly right. You open the business based on passion. And one of our driving goals was really there there was the Husky Pub, which is great establishment, it's been around a long time. But besides the pub, there was really nowhere to go for an interesting beer. And so we thought we'd try to create it. So we sort of based the business off that. And then suddenly you realize you've actually, yeah, you got to pay rent. Um, preferably you've got to earn money. And then you've got to pay other people too when you hire them. So you suddenly realize, oh, we better sort some stuff out here.
Cool. So what about your equipment? So tell me about, so you've had several, you've already expanded, right? So
That's right.
you set
Yep.
up your first brewery in 2019. Um, nice little cellar door, and was it a Premier Stainless system you had back then?
No, we went through Boutique. So Neil
Boutique,
and
that's right. Yeah.
Gav at Boutique. Again, not knowing much about breweries and setting up stainless steel and manufacturing in general, I had absolutely no knowledge of anything to do with manufacturing. Just I was an academic I my whole career had been in that side. So suddenly jumping into a factory making a product, it's
Mm.
just a completely different kettle of fish. So we thought it would be prudent to go through somebody who knew what they were doing. So
Yep.
yeah, we went through Boutique, Neil and Gav, who were able to advise us on, you know, configuration, brew house size, what you need to do to the building to get it ready for a brewery, what you need before you start brewing your first batch of beer, all that sort of stuff. So that intermediary was, I would say, really important for us and probably saved us quite a lot of headaches.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, between those two, they've helped a lot of people set up breweries around
Yeah,
Australia and
absolutely.
lent a lot of knowledge along the way to the aspiring entrepreneur. But I mean, I don't know how many years of beer industry expertise they have, but it's got to be like 50 or something like that.
Mhm.
So that's great. So you sourced, you paid for the supply, but you also had that value add of people who knew the brewer industry. They weren't just a click and collect from an overseas stainless steel manufacturer. They actually knew local regulations and the lay of the land.
Yes, that's exactly right. And then, I mean, they also have leverage. So if you go through a factory in China, that's, vast, probably. You're just a small cog, but going through someone larger like Boutique means that, they've got quite a lot of stuff in production. You got a bit of leverage there if something goes wrong. And the great experience we had with Boutique is stuff did go wrong with some of our equipment and it was sorted out. So you've got that after sales backup if a tank isn't quite up to spec or whatever it might be, or a pump fails or something. So yeah, it was a good move from our perspective.
Right. So you outgrow that premises pretty quickly, and then what?
We did. So we maxed it out, and this is probably back to our naivety. The configuration, brewhouse configuration was it was two vessel system with with a separate mash lauter,
Yeah. What size? Sorry, what was the brew length?
uh, 10 heck.
10 heck. Okay.
So, but the separate mash lauter meant that we couldn't double brew in it.
Yeah.
There's no time saving. So we suddenly find ourselves in a position where we thought, uh-oh, what are we going to do? And then the way we'd configured the tap room was probably a bit of a mistake as well because we couldn't add a third vessel easily, and brewing when the tap room was open was quite a little bit problematic because you got to get stuff in and out from where customers are. Whereas if we'd used a different part of the venue, we could have used the back ramp without impinging on customers. So I guess it was kind of our own fault, but we outgrew that site. But we were very lucky in that another site, another shed opened up just across the road for rent. And that's where our larger factory is now. So the original tap room is still where it was. That's where we have our lab in there now. We've actually just changed from the 10 hex system over to a genuine pilot kit, so a 2.5 hex pilot kit. And then we have the larger four vessel 20 hex system across the road.
Fantastic. So, and what happened to the original 10 hex system?
We sold it,
Right.
and the customer is going to start using it hopefully very, very shortly. So yeah, it's gone to a better home. We found it was being very underutilized because it was always our I guess vision to use that for experimental one-off beers.
Hmm.
But given the arse kind of fell out of the craft beer market, essentially as soon as we expanded, it
When did
turned
you
out to
when did
be
you expand?
when did we expand? Just immediately, just off the back of COVID. So 2019.
Yeah.
Hang on, no, 2019, COVID was
COVID was
so we
2020,
probably
so that March
expanded in
2020.
late 20, early 21.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yes,
There was a bit
that's
of a there was a bit of a
2021.
sugar rush in the economy there.
Yes, well,
That's-
that's exactly right. And COVID for us ended up because we're a regional area. COVID is generally seen as a very bad thing for businesses in cities, obviously, and it was. I mean, cities that were experiencing multiple lockdowns had enormous problems for businesses. The flip side of that was regional businesses, as soon as lockdowns began to ease, people flocked out of the city. So we were at capacity for months and months and months after COVID. Um,
Mm.
and to the point where we really couldn't keep up with demand. COVID also was the trigger for us to put beer in cans because we find ourselves with all this beer and no one to sell it to. So it really accelerated our business model way beyond where we wanted to be at that particular point. We were only 3, 4, 5 months old by the time COVID hit. So um, yeah, we had no real intention of going into cans probably for another 12 months. So yeah, it accelerated our model. Um, we got a grant to open the new brewery off the back of COVID through the Regional Job Creation Fund from the
Mm.
New South Wales government as well. So we wouldn't have done it if we hadn't got that grant. But yeah, then obviously, like I say, early doors into expanding, times got an awful lot tougher for craft beer, for the economy in general. Um, so so yes, it definitely hasn't been all a bed of roses since then, I would say.
Mm.
As I'm sure a lot of breweries would say as well.
Absolutely. And this might be a sensitive question, but how many liters a year are you brewing now, 6 years after inception?
Um, about 250,000.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we opened the doors December 2019. So we started the business 2018, opened the doors December 2019, and then I think we expanded in 2021. Actually, I think I'm a bit ahead there. We probably expanded in early 2022. We started the process in 21, and we would have brewed the first batches in the new brewery in 2022. So yeah, we're at about 250,000. Um, we we could do more than that given the equipment we have. So that's a good thing. We've got a bit of slack in the system, I guess, to grow. But obviously the model, as potentially is the same for many craft breweries now, it's much more progressive, building growth rather than that aggressive fast growth that was very characteristic of breweries back a few years back.
Does the current excise remission cap govern how you want to grow?
No, we did talk about that, but we still thought it was better to grow
Mm.
and pay the excise. Now, you're probably aware that about what, 3 weeks ago, Labour announced that the excise cap would increase by $50,000. Um, that, from our perspective, is really excellent. We're right in that zone. So
Mm.
we do pay excise, but not until sort of March, I think it is, something like that. So
In the financial year, right? Yeah.
correct, yeah. So having that extra 50,000 will be absolutely fantastic for us. Of course, it doesn't kick in until FY 26, which is a bit of a shame because it'd be very nice to get the help now. I think everyone's had a seriously tough couple of years, so having that in place right now would be awesome. But yes, that the extended cap really helps, and I think it's probably worth giving the IBA a plug at this point because I know they've worked very hard on their campaigning and their discussions with politicians to try to get that over the line. So Kylie and all have done a really good job on our behalf there. So fair play to them, and um, they've worked, yeah, for such a small team. I know they work incredibly hard, so they definitely deserve a shout out. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And then the other really positive thing I think is obviously Labour then also announced the excise freeze
Mm.
because the the threshold and the ever continuing excise that is pegged to CPI are obviously related because the government gives with one hand, but ever increasing excise rates just chip away at it.
Yeah.
So in the long term, it'll just vanish in increasing excise. So the fact that they've frozen the CPI increases for a couple of years now is really good. But obviously, there's a lot more work needs to be done on that whole tax regime. I think you're probably aware you would have been probably in the industry back in 2010 when I think was it the Henry tax report talked about reviewed all alcohol tax and talked about a level playing field. So a freeze is good, but there's certainly a lot more work to be done to give beer a level playing field in the alcohol industry to make sure that ever increasing excise doesn't just chip away the threshold for small business.
Sure. So when compared to the wine equalization tax, for example, that the cider industry and the wine industry benefit from, whereas for some reason beer, RTDs, spirits are put into different categories of alcohol tax is
Yeah,
pretty much
that's
what they're
exactly right. And I think, yeah, and I think wine hasn't had a tax increase since the late 90s,
saying.
something like that. Oh, maybe,
Fabulous. You know, like
but
how is it,
maybe
did the
it's 20
politicians
years.
just own wineries? Like what's going on there? Like
That
it's
is certainly a theory I've heard.
yeah.
Uh, Politicians owning vineyards. So maybe if we can give them stakes in breweries, that could be a way towards getting the excise sorted out.
Yeah, excellent. That's a really good strategy. I love it. So you're currently the director or a director at Jervis Bay Brewing Company. Do you have a board? Do you have
No,
a
no, we don't. We don't have a board. So I'm the managing director. There's four directors.
Mm.
There's myself and the three partners. I've now taken over the managing director role. So the guy that was doing that, who's called Christian left us last year. He went to pursue a career in University of New South Wales. So I took over the MD role
Mm.
for better or for worse. So there's only two of the original founders now work in the business. There's myself and Paul. So Paul does the finance and marketing, and I do managing director, brewing, um, and anything else that comes up on any given day.
Right, because like I'm looking at the breadth of that role. I'm just considering it from the outside, like managing director. Like there's a whole lot, and as you're growing, I'm sure, and with your PhD background, your attention to detail, all of a sudden, being a brewer is about being creative and new things, and being a managing director a lot of the time is about mitigating risk, looking where the next, risk that can seriously impact your business is about. How do you go about juggling that? And
It,
having enough hours in the day to be a dad and a husband and a person and a healthy individual.
yeah, it is a good question. It's difficult. I would say at this particular moment, we're probably a little thin. I mean, I should probably start by saying I'm not the only brewer. I have a really, really good team. So um, that frees me up. Joe and Nige. So Joe is full time. We've got four in our brew team. Joe, Nige, Penny, and Fiacre, and they're all fantastic. They all do different roles. Joe's the full time brewer. Nige is a part time brewer. Um, and one of our brewers actually left last year, Jimmy, was pretty much our first major hire in the brewery. So we're really missing him.
Mm.
Um, but so a lot of the day-to-day processes in the brewery are looked after by those guys. My brewing these days tends to be in the pilot kit. So it's the more sort of, I guess, fun, not as important in terms of, the business underpinning as the beers that come out of the big brewery. Um, it's definitely much more experimental. So they do free me up to have time to do that sort of stuff. I rely heavily. We've got other great people in the team. So we meet regularly. Others do, people can go away, do various tasks, and we can come back, and I can be confident that, they'll kick some goals and I'll have the information needed and we'll make collective decisions. Um, we sit down annually and we create a business strategy for the coming 12 months. So we look at what we did the last 12 months and what we want to do in the coming 12 months. And we put names against the various milestones or goals, whatever you want to call them. So one of my key roles is essentially meeting those people regularly and making sure that we're on track to hit those goals. So obviously I don't have to do all of those, do all the legwork myself. And it's very much making sure that others have the support needed to carry out their tasks. And the strategy is great because it means all areas of the business are pulling in the same broad direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So creating that, those smart goals and that strategy and that tactical execution plan, and actually like having accountability about who is accountable for it and what's the deadline for it to be due. And if something goes over, okay, let's talk about it. You know, why did
Yeah,
we miss that goal? Or if something was really easy, how come we achieve that so easily? So you've actually got a strategy in place now, and you're at a point where and you're actually governing that strategy, which is
yeah, absolutely.
amazing.
Um, and then obviously we have the directors as well. So we have, well, we're supposed to have monthly directors meetings. They don't always
Sure.
happen as planned, but that sort of oversight that you were talking about, risk mitigation, the bigger picture thinking, all of that sort of stuff can be done at that level so that, you know, it's the sort of blue sky thinking, where could we go? What could we do? What risks might come out of the blue for us? That sort of thing. So there are others in the business also thinking about that beyond myself as the MD. Um, and look, we've actually, for being open, I guess we're 5 years now, but for being open 5 years, I would say we've had a fair proportion of, well, trauma, if you want to, for want of a better word, in
Hmm.
regards outside unforeseen things hitting us. So it's been a very, very quick learning experience for us and learning curve. And that experience, although highly stressful at the time and, something that you probably would rather didn't happen, it does put you in a better place in terms of your ability to run a business, to think about risk, to mitigate risk coming up. So it's that old adage: everything's an opportunity or um, a learning experience, and I think we've certainly looked at the past few years as that. It's provided us with some tools that are very useful going forward. So yeah, like I say, you wouldn't really want them to happen, but given that they have, I guess you make the best of it.
Have you ever thought about starting your own craft brewery? At the Brewers Institute, we have an online course packed with advice from the founders of the Brewers Institute for people wanting to reduce risk, save time and cost in opening a brewery. Go to thebrewersinstitute.com. Let's switch a little bit to marketing quickly. I'm actually going to take this opportunity here to unblur my background and get into the second beer, which is the Bright Idea XPA. I noticed, so obviously your name is Jervis Bay Brewing Company, based around local. The Point Pils is around named after Point Perpendicular, which is the northern headland at Jervis Bay, which is an incredible headland and has the big lighthouse there and part of that big military area where you can only gain access to Point Perpendicular these days. But iconic for its land-based game fishing, amongst
Right.
amongst other things. And the Bright Idea XPA is about the locals. I believe it's about celebrating the locals who put up resistance to building Australia's first nuclear reactor in Huskisson. Is that right?
Not exactly in Huskisson, in a place called Murray's Beach, which is it's now a national park called Butteree, which is owned by the Wreck Bay
Yeah.
community.
And Wreck
But
Bay being the local Aboriginal community?
correct
Yeah.
settlement, yeah. Now I actually got corrected because I think the can does say Australia's first nuclear reactor. So they were gonna build this thing which is on a beach which is probably one of the most beautiful you could ever imagine. So
Yeah.
if you think of a tropical wonderland with, white sands, turquoise water, tree fringed beach,
Great place for
beautiful.
a nuclear reactor, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. If you go to Murray's Beach, it is literally one of the nicest beaches you'll ever set foot on. It is
Yeah.
glorious. And But I guess it actually is a great place for a nuclear power plant because right out at sea, I think that's kind of what their thinking was. But I got corrected by a local because the can says nuclear reactor, and someone actually got in touch with me and said, "Well, technically, it was Australia's first nuclear power station, so there is a reactor in Australia in Ansto, which is
That's
the
right.
research place in Sydney." So
Yeah.
just to correct the record there, I was a bit lax with my vernacular around power station versus reactor.
Nonetheless, they were looking to put a power station in there, and the locals, protested against it. They ended up winning. The nuclear reactor and power station was never built there. So you decided to dedicate one of your brands around that as an ecological hero that you are, and someone who can't help but follow their passions. Is that does that play into it?
Yeah, it definitely does. So um we as a business, it's not just me, I should say. I mean, ecological sustainability, environment, that they are all passions of mine.
Mm.
But I'm really lucky that the three guys who are now my partners all really bought into that. So we sat down together way back in 2018 and thought about what we wanted to be, what we wanted a business to be.
Mm.
And we all agreed that environment, sustainability, giving back to the local area, supporting community were really important for us. So I think, and that's inspired by where we live. The natural surroundings of Jervis Bay are fantastic. And the reason we dedicated a beer called The Bright Idea, obviously it's tongue in cheek because we feel it wasn't a great idea to stick a nuclear power plant just there, was because Jervis Bay could have been an extremely different place. You can imagine a nuclear power plant there. It was also went at one period, it was going to be called Pacific City.
Mm.
So there was a vision to create another deep water East Coast port to rival Sydney in Jervis Bay,
Yep.
um, linked to Canberra via trains, etc., etc. So there have been many sort of ideas and close calls for this area that would have completely changed the character and the natural beauty that we're now so lucky to live in. So, given what we called ourselves, Jervis Bay Brewing Company, we did that because we feel it is an iconic area of New South Wales. But we then obviously if you're bound to a place, it makes sense to name your naming convention, or certainly ours is, reflects that place. So you'll see most of our beers have a link to the local area. So you've the Bright Idea, you've Point Perp Pills, 11 Days Pale Ale, which is our approachable pale ale, is inspired by a shipwreck where there were some sailors shipwrecked in Jervis Bay and that they walked back to Sydney. So we try to be inspired by local environment and history when we're naming our beers, and you know, just to give that sense that just to relate it back, I guess, to the name and to pinning ourselves to a place.
Sure. So, for example, I bought these beers in Newcastle, right? So on the other side of Sydney, there's probably about 500 k's between us. So you've obviously got at least state right, if not East Coast distribution. Can having such a local branding name and philosophy be a double-edged sword that can deter people if they don't have it from buying your product if they don't have a connection to your local region?
I would say the answer is definitely yes, um, with some caveats. So, first of all, we never intended to be a larger brewery. That wasn't why we opened. So we always intended to have a local tap room, which is why we called ourselves Jervis Bay Brewing Co.
Hmm.
So then as you expand, you hit that problem that if you're not familiar with Jervis Bay, why would you buy a beer from there? And I think that's a genuine problem. The flip side of it is obviously if you are familiar with that area, and this is a beautiful area, then your experience with this area is likely to be positive. So you're potentially more likely to get a positive association with the brand. I think certainly it's a well-known area, we're not national. We don't really aspire to be national. I think some of the logistics involved in being a national brewery would be just mind-bogglingly difficult. Logistics are already just such a nightmare, and I can only imagine going national like some of the big guys. But
So where are you
um,
now? Are you like New South Wales and Victoria?
New South Wales, Vic, and ACT, yeah.
Right. Yep.
Very occasionally Queensland, but we don't supply Queensland as a, we're don't have much of a presence up there. Um, so I think if you did go national, you're probably right. Why would someone in Darwin that probably might never have heard of Jervis Bay buy it? Um, but maybe they've had a good experience with it and they would. The other the other thing with that it potentially opens for us is because Australia is synonymous with a clean, healthy environment, and Jervis Bay is very much, I would say, a flagship of that. If we ever decided to export, we're probably in a reasonably good place to do so because the brand you would export to Asia.
Mm.
And we know that one of the big drivers of products entering Asia is demand for that sort of really pristine environment, that aspirational clean beach lifestyle that potentially isn't always there for some of the larger cities in Asia.
Yeah.
So we have potentially an advantage there if we ever decided to go down that route, but it's not exactly on our radar yet. But definitely something to consider if you're setting up a brewery. Do you want to be very local, or do you want to eventually go wider? And does that therefore influence your naming convention right from the get-go?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's really cool. So, we've talked about brewing, we've talked about finance, we've talked about governance, we talked a little bit about branding and marketing. We've only got an hour, right? And I'm sure that we could sit here for 3 hours and do this. What about culture, organizational culture? It seems like you've got quite strong links to the people inside your organization. How important is that in your business and in the success you've experienced to date?
Massively. So I mentioned to you a couple of minutes ago that we sat down, the four of us, before we even opened the business and thought about who we wanted to be
Yeah.
and what we wanted the business to be. Now, we are now a B Corp certified business.
I noticed that. I was really impressed when I bought the can.
Yeah,
You've got to be probably the smallest brewery in Australia that's B Corp certified.
yeah,
One
we
off.
would definitely, I would suspect we are.
Yeah.
We're in
There's a
some
lot
pretty
of
exotic.
money, a lot of time and effort goes into being a B Corp, right?
Correct, yeah. And you really, you really have to want to do it
Yeah.
because there's a lot of data gathering, as you say, a lot of effort, a lot of work over many years. But the great thing about going down that route for us is that it affects culture.
Huh.
So culture both helped us, but then it was kind of circular. B Corp fed back in and informed our culture. So, for example, one of the things that B Corp require you to do is change your constitution. So you have a purpose statement and a stakeholder clause. Your purpose statement basically says that you exist for a higher purpose than money, that you also exist to look after the environment and look after community. So there's a social and environmental element to your business. And the stakeholder clause binds myself and my fellow directors and the Brew Puppies, actually, anyone, shareholders, to making sure that any decisions they make consider the wider ramifications of those decisions on people and the environment rather than just the finances of the business.
Mm.
So it puts you in a very different place. And that, I think, really sums up our culture. We very much value the environment. So we make decisions based on not just financial, but how it will affect our sustainability goals. We make decisions based on people. So the people that we employ and the customers that we serve are paramount, clearly for us. So we have an employee share scheme, for example, to reward people that stay with us for the long haul, to try to give them a reason to stay with us, and reward for all the hard work that they do. So I think having that culture of looking after the environment and looking after your team and looking after the community is massively important because I think obviously people recognize it and they want to support you because you're supporting them. So from our perspective, I mean, I think it's good business practice. We would have done it anyway, but I think it is good for businesses, particularly in the modern world, to do that. Um, and we have a culture around quality, both of customer service and of beer, that are, really, really important for us. And I think a successful business, I mean, I've only worked in one business,
Mm.
so I can't talk about others,
Sure, but
but
you've worked in other
um,
organizations as well.
I have, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, you do culture is a very difficult thing, particularly in, I would say, in government, obviously. So I've experienced in government. You know yourself, or most people will know that governments, departments chop and change depending who's in power. And it's very difficult to maintain culture in an environment like that. Cynicism is easy. You're a bit distant from decision makers, all of that stuff. So I think having culture where everybody is part of a bigger team, where the communication's good, where the strategies are clear and everyone's pulling in the same direction is just super important for us. And I I just feel really lucky. Both the brew team and the taproom team are absolutely fantastic, as well as Nikki, who's sales and logistics. We are very lucky in the people that we have, and the people that you have are in many ways all you have,
Mm.
because without people, you're not doing much. Um, I think you said yourself about 10 minutes ago, how do you do all those various jobs? The answer is with other people. Without other people, I definitely couldn't. So yeah, you've got to have that culture, I think, and you've got to be prepared to work at it. And I would say to someone who was aspiring to open up a business, it's definitely worth sitting down early and deciding what you want to stand for.
That's that's a pretty amazing 5 minutes. And it's incredible how just to listen to how you're empowering your stakeholders, internal and external, to succeed, and you're actually feeding off that success. I wonder what you would have thought if back in 2018 when you were starting this business, what a podcast in 2025 would sound like. And you'd probably think you'd be talking about hops and malts and all these things, whereas really you're talking about the people, you're talking about empowering them and how empowering them can make you a better professional and in turn make your organization a better organization, for the local region and the business community. I think it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is quite amazing to fast forward 5 years and to be talking like this. As you say, I definitely wouldn't have picked it 5 years ago that this would have been the subject of the chat. Yeah, just goes to show best laid plans and all that sort of stuff.
Cool. So let's get on to pretty much the last question now. We're already at an hour. So um you've obviously got a future ahead of you. What does success look like to you for your brewing company? And for you
Yeah.
personally, for your brewing company?
Yeah. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that we've probably got a bit of excess capacity.
Hmm.
So I think success for us, probably at the moment, our goal would be just to max out our capacity.
Hmm.
Um, the last few years have been so volatile that it would be really nice to get to a point where you have some normality, you have actually some predictability in your business model, in your sales, in your growth targets,
Hmm.
in all of that sort of stuff. And there just has not been any predictability in forecasting and sales, even as you know from speaking to me over the last couple of years, forecasting hops like I do with you
Hmm.
in your with your other hat on. Um, just so difficult. Bit of a mug's game forecasting has been for the past couple of years. So
And it must be like that for aluminium, for malts, for raw materials, for everything, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you do your best, but the volatility has been very, very difficult. So I think success would be over the next few years, um, just getting that incremental steady growth, getting to a point where we've really hit our straps and we're maxing out the brewery. And like I said, it'd be just delightful if there was some sort of predictability in the business world for a little while, so that you could actually go, I've got some confidence in the cash flow model this year.
Yeah.
Because what we do is we do our cash flow model and our projections, and then we whack 10% off them, and then we whack 20% off them, and
Yeah.
we see where we'll be at with those two things. So not having to do that would be delightful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, last question then. So, would you, having your time over again, if we could go back to 2018, you obviously took a career path there. You could have continued on with ecology, or gone on being employed, or you could have continued down this route. Would you do it all again?
Good question. Good question. So there was so much uncertainty. So what I got into in 2018 is very different to what I'm in now, I think is the first thing. So like I say, we started off opening the tap room, small regional brewery in 2018. It was in 2019 we opened the doors. It was bloody hard work. Incidentally, I probably wasn't prepared for just how much hard work it was. I ran the brewery by myself for a year, which pretty relentless grind. We then moved into a much bigger brewery. We've got a team, so they're very, very different things. Would I go into it again? If we had a crystal ball, I wouldn't have done the expansion at the time we did it.
Yeah.
And that is basically because just the way we found ourselves economically with the cost of living crisis and stuff like that, it was pretty much the perfect time not to expand a business. It's probably a perfect time to consolidate a business. And but we don't have a crystal ball. And when we were making that decision, it's also important to remember that we're coming out of COVID. So actually expanding and going into the wholesale game and taking some of your eggs out of the taproom basket was actually, we thought it was quite smart, because you don't know how long the rolling closures are going to go on for. So we expanded based on the evidence we had then. With a crystal ball, probably would have delayed it for a while. But would it do it all again? I think I probably would. The reason being, dancing to your own tune is a nice thing to do. And, you get up. I obviously, like everybody, you have times where you sort of like, oh God, I could really dread work this week or today. But you have other times where it's very, very rewarding. And as an example of that, I was brewing in the pilot system on Friday, and, the afternoon comes in and you get to see local people come in, enjoy themselves on a Friday afternoon, drinking the beer that you've made, having a good time, having a chat with each other. And we've provided a place for them to meet and beverages for them to enjoy. We support local charities, and we've got an amazing group of people working for us. So when you take a step back and look at where you're at in that context, it's extremely rewarding. And the fact that we're B Corp certified, which for an external stamp of approval was a really important thing for us to achieve, and we did. So I think I would. It's the short answer.
With a long justification. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. But there'll always be lots of ups and downs, is what I would say to somebody opening a brewery now. And there'll be unpredictability in there, and you've just got to be prepared, I guess, to roll with that, learn from it, and allow it to make you better.
Amazing. Oisín, thank you so much for joining us on the Brewers Institute podcast. There's so much that I've learned out of today's podcast, and that I'm sure any of our listeners will as well. So thanks so much. Anyone, next time you're in Jervis Bay, pop into Jervis Bay Brewing Company and, go and see Oisín and his team and get yourself a beer. That's great. Thanks a lot, mate.
Thanks, Michael. Great to chat. And thanks to all your listeners.
Thanks for listening. We'd really appreciate if you could leave an iTunes review or rating, or follow us on Spotify. It'll help aspiring brewers find our cast and hear the journey of our great guests.